Hello marketer, it's Ty here and welcome to another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. I'm thrilled to bring you Guy Parsonage onto the show today. Guy is partner and experienced consulting leader at PwC based in Hong Kong, where he's responsible for driving digital transformation and innovation with global brands in and out of Greater China. Prior to PwC, Guy has a stellar agency background with brand experience in events agencies and is CEO of a digital and CX agency that was acquired by PwC to help them establish their CX consulting operations in China. Today's chat is another deep dive into CX, but this time we go broader and deeper than before. Guy and I speak about what it takes to shift a company culture from internal facing to customer centric, how to build an organisation-wide CX capability, along with the tactics of how you implement this through changes to people, process and technology. We also cover off what role marketing and the CMO needs to play, the importance of linking the CX strategy to the business objectives, some of the watch outs and where to start. So whether you're already on the CX journey or yet to start, tune in to tap into Guy's incredible experience in helping global brands transform to become more customer centric. As always, there is a lot covered, so to be sure you take action on the show, you can download the notes with all the tips, strategies and watch outs laid out in a neat PDF for you. If the podcast were cheese, the notes would be the biscuit. They go together perfectly to help you deepen your knowledge and put the learning to use. You can get them by linking through to our website in the show notes or head to growthgenerators.io, head to the podcast section, look out for this episode and download those notes. Lastly, if you're loving this CX content and you want more, or if there's another topic you want us to cover, please let me know. You can find me, Ty Hayes, on LinkedIn or at Tyron Hayes on Twitter. Shoot me a note with your thoughts, and if you've just discovered the show, remember to hit follow or subscribe so you can get the latest episodes as they launch. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from leading CMOs and thought leaders about what it takes to create a high-performance marketing team. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io. Now, let's get on to the show.
Welcome Guy Parsonage, partner and experienced consulting leader at PwC, to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
G'day, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited for today's chat. I know we connected a couple months back when we had a brief chat. I got your advice on a project I was working on, which I really valued. So thank you again for your time then. And a referral from Natalie Trong, who has been a guest on the show and also recommended other guests. Ed Bell, both have been exceptional, and I know today will be an enriching discussion as well. So thank you in advance, Guy. Now, CX has been a theme of increasing interest on the show of recent times, and with your track record both as a marketing and CX leader and as a consultant to big brands undergoing digital and CX transformation, I think there's going to be a lot for us to talk about. I thought today maybe we could start a bit macro and firstly talk about what it takes to create a customer-centric culture and an organisation-wide CX capability, kind of as the first part, and then drill down into a bit more detail around what role does a CMO or CEO or CXO need to play, and then getting into the detail, what are the changes to people, process and technology required? How does that sound?
Totally fine. Looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Great. And I was fascinated reading your bio in prep for this interview, from trainee at a meat company to CEO of agencies, advisor to startups, board member through to partner at PwC. I'd love to hear more about that. And I thought maybe through the lens of how your career has evolved in line with marketing trends and how it's helped shape your approach to CX today.
Fair enough. Yeah, there is a red thread, even though it's very hard to see from the surface. But do you want me to just kind of run through how I got to where I got to, kind of give you the soup to nuts as quick a way as possible? Originally from the UK, educated in Liverpool, south of England, and always had this kind of love of food, of fun, of drink, and all the things that went with it. My family's, I'm a 7th generation butcher, and my family has a long history and a very broad reach into all forms of meat management, meat production, meat delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the dinner table conversation. So that was an essential part of my education, but along with it, I decided to also work within pizza place. I was a waiter, I was a cocktail barman, I was a barista. And then when I got to Australia, like any good model or actor, which I was trying to be, of course, I was predominantly a waiter or a barista.
Yeah.
But I managed to have some fun through all of that. And there was always this kind of general sense of celebrating all things around food and going out and restaurants, etc. So that was where my passion was driven. I got to the realization quite quickly that no matter how good I would be, I would still be carrying plates at some point. And so I just felt that I wanted to broaden my reach a bit further. And by the age of 25, I was looking for something that had a broader career possibility. And loving the kind of party event side of what was going on in Sydney, I followed some mates of mine that seemed to have an amazing career in event management, and got some great mentors and moved into that space. And it was very much around the kind of conferences, galas, that type of thing. I was able to get into Jack Morton as a producer, which is kind of one of the world's leading brand experience agencies, part of Interpublic Group. And so I grew within that from being a kind of producer of events, and I always thought that it was about the logistics, into becoming a marketeer and understanding that it was actually about marketing and marketing strategy and customer and digital and all those, and digital was coming up in the space at the same time as well. And so got moved over to Hong Kong with Jack Morton when there was an opportunity for a bit of a reshuffle in the agency here. Ended up leading that agency, growing out the Jack Morton footprint through the rest of Asia. When I realized there was a bit of a ceiling, that my boss wasn't going anywhere, I started looking elsewhere, and I managed to find Fluid, which was an independent integrated marketing and digital agency. Joined them as CEO and partner, grew them 100% year on year for 3 years, and managed to find PwC that was looking for an agency to acquire and build out their experience consulting team. So I was sucked into the PwC engine. My other partners were bought out, and my 30-person team came in to build the foundation of what was experience consulting then and now. And we've built that out across the world. We've got experience consulting now in 26 or 28 even cities. And so it's a global capability, but I run the Hong Kong team for that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. You can see how the kind of hospitality roots, that's at the cold face of customer experience, getting immediate feedback from the customers.
Exactly. And pitching day in, day out.
That's the special or whatever the restaurant's trying to push. Yeah. And to the brand events and marketing, again, brand experience has obviously become a big thing of recent times. And then through to Fluid around digital, and then the buyout. Yeah, you can kind of definitely see the thread through that journey. We might then get into the main body of the interview, which is around, creating that customer-centric culture and org-wide CX capability. We had Nick Lee on the show recently, and kind of one of the first questions that I asked him was for his view on what CX or CX management is, just to keep our audience on the same page. I think we've got a relatively, sophisticated CMO audience, but I still think the definition can vary a little bit. So what is the definition that you or PwC likes to use for CX?
So I can speak for all of PwC, but I can definitely give my point of view of how we often deliver it within my team. And so I really consider it to be any and all of the interaction that a customer has with an organization, either direct or indirect, so desired and created, or not actually, just implied through what's happening within those various different channels that a customer has through the entire journey, from consideration, so possibly not even on those direct channels at all the way through to purchase, and then post-purchase, and then loyalty, and then ideally repurchase. So that entire experience, whether it's internal, external, on-channel, direct, etc.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. And then how do you think this intertwines with a customer-centric culture?
So there are many organizations, every organization creates a customer experience, but whether or not they're doing it through a customer-centric culture will affect how good that experience actually is. So to me, a lot of it about having a customer-centric culture is actually knowing who your customer is, being purposeful about the customer that you want to attract and how you want to engage them, and evolving your product, service, and experience based on those interactions. So getting a feedback from them and evolving. So to me, it's putting the customer as the champion, not the product or the management team or the legacy as the champion. It's not that we've been doing this for 100 years. No, you got away with it for 100 years. How are you going to do it for the next 100? By putting the customer at the center.
Yeah. And that begs a follow-up question, which is no small one. But how do organisations then make that leap from their 100 years or so of history of being perhaps product-led, executive-led, an inward-looking culture through to a customer-centric?
Ideally, there's a burning platform, because if there isn't and there's a total belief, then often what you see is that it's the generational shift that creates the change. So often you have to wait for that original management team that did so well doing what they did for so long to actually have to almost manage out until the new culture can come in. But often, we've got the wonderful examples of the Kodaks of the world that even though the bridges are burning, they're still changing the way in which they're doing things. So you need the burning platform. It then needs to be driven through the organization, and then the organization needs to care or have a reason to care about the customer. They don't always have to care about the direct customer, but they have to have a reason to care why the customer matters.
Yeah. It kind of strikes me as the saying, your why needs to be stronger than your why not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is, I'm not the first person to say this, but the customer has changed so dramatically, and their expectations have changed so dramatically, and never more so than in the last 2 years, that they have gone through a change. The business has gone through a change, how they're interacting with each other and with their customer. And they've been forced into doing that, but therefore the entire product and service needs to change as well.
And what do you think like those major shifts are, I guess, from either a B2B or a B2C? How is that customer lens, customer viewpoint, the choices they make, what they're looking for from a brand or a company or a product change? What do you think are the most striking changes that have been brought about?
The most striking, I think, is channel choice when it comes to purchase of product from a B2C point of view. People are doing significantly more research online than they were doing before. And so then that means that you need to differentiate through that consideration phase, which people weren't doing very much because they were quite lucky or lazy, one would say, that people will walk in their door because of either tourism or because of locale of individuals, and then they were able to purchase through POS or the way in which they were having that product availability. You can't just put your product at the end of the row now and hope that people are going to grab it. So how are you engaging in that consideration phase? That's changed dramatically. The actual purchase itself now being significantly online, or at least heavily researched before offline, if they're able to be offline. And then I think the other thing which has happened with online purchasing is that the competitive set have changed dramatically. The rise of the Asian brands, more and more so beauty brands are actually Asian based now rather than the globals that we've been used to in the past, etc. And so that competitive set's changed quite dramatically. The price point of them has changed, but their marketing and brand proposition have evolved rapidly as well. So.
Do you think it's I guess developed that sense of buy local as people have been more within their community? I just get that sense when we were in lockdown and over here in Perth that we haven't had a lot of that, but that definitely you felt that need to go and support your local cafes, your local businesses. You wanted to buy local. And then I guess from an e-commerce perspective, when shipping and other things got affected, that almost forced the hand of some consumers and companies to offer more local. But has that been a kind of macro shift that people are now more considering kind of local first, where they may have gone global before or not?
My data's all very skewed to China, and so China hasn't had that same issue. Buy local from a point from Hong Kong still matters, but when I think local Hong Kong, no, because we've always been flying in the majority of our food, and we will still fly in the majority of our food. So there is an element of local organic which is coming up. I'm seeing that definitely from a Hong Kong point of view. From a China point of view, I would say that because they opened up so quickly, that actually it went back to being business as usual in many ways. And so what you look at the stats between them actually buying online, they're now the largest e-commerce market in the world now. And it was interesting that their purchase decisions and purchase time, more than 60% out of 100% being online, offline, 60% is now online. So all their purchase decisions, well, the majority of the purchases are driven by online. But we still know that it's only actually about 30% of total revenues are sold online. So that's gone from 15% a few years ago. So the rise is massive.
Yeah.
I think there are definitely pockets of the locavore and the local movement, without a doubt. But I would say that from the markets that I'm focusing on, Hong Kong, China, I would say the internationalized local brands are definitely coming up, but they're coming up around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And then building on that, so we've talked about the inward to the customer-centric culture. Then another big question, but maybe a macro view or a framework around this, but how do organizations then go about building an organisation-wide CX capability?
That is a massive question. So how to build the culture, back to my initial point, burning platform. So reason to believe that we should change, I think it is essential to try and capture it, or at least to build a story around it, because the whole organization needs to believe in that. Ideally, and this is, I think, where if we're talking to CMOs, it's very challenging for a CMO to lead the change without that CEO top table endorsement agreement and at least the right messaging. So leadership sponsorship and authentic sponsorship. So giving them the language, the right language. They might not know the strategy. They might not know, it's not their world, but they need to get it quickly. I think the other one is that, and I've heard on your previous podcast as well, you've been fantastic at talking about the benefits of customer experience and what that brings to organizations over time. And so clarifying that inside the organization as well. So do we want to be one of the world's leading organizations like these? They don't just have better customer experience, they have a significantly better bottom line, they have a significantly better shareholder engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to drive the business metrics before trying to get obsessed on the experience metrics. And I'll talk about that a fair bit, because we do our work through a belief structure of BX and T, business experience and technology combined. These are the three lenses that we try to bring to any project that we solve. And it's deliberately in that order. Clarify the business benefit, the business metrics, the KPIs, what you're doing and why you're doing it for the organization. Drive the experience that you want to create that allows you to differentiate in the market, that allows you to gain those customers, that allows you to have that traction, and then enable that with technology. Not the other way around, which is often the business has a problem, technology can solve it. This is the technology we want. Now, should there be an experience? So focusing in it that way. And I think then that reads to the story, which is get the business strategy clarified. Where does the customer fit into that? Connect your customer experience strategy to your business strategy wholeheartedly. So we want to succeed. We will exceed by being experience focused, and we will enable ourselves with the best technologies to deliver that, either through cost savings or experience benefits, etc.
Yeah, makes sense, and goes to your earlier points around that importance of the CEO and the executive sponsors and champions, and what do they care about? The business metrics, it's shareholder value, market share, revenue, whatever that is, that's what they're on the hook for. So how do you lead with that, set the right objectives, and then, that is supported through your experience and your experience metrics and your tech. So that makes sense. And also explains why it's difficult for the CMO to lead it without that exec sponsorship. But they still obviously have a role to play.
Significant. Yeah. And this is where I think the CMO is often, when there hasn't been a customer practice or a customer team, the CMO is, the CMO should own the customer. They should be the one that's the champion for the customer. And then as that evolves and starts to incorporate all of the other teams that need to deliver, that customer practice probably comes out of that.
Yeah. And back again to your first definition of what CX is, it is far reaching and wide and broad and deep, and it goes across more things than just what marketing covers. So, I totally agree. They need to own that customer and the touch points they control. They need to influence that across the business with the executive support, but they need to get the other teams on board to execute against a strategy at the right time. So coming back then to the other changes needed, so we've touched briefly on what the CMO can do, but maybe even from your experience, anything else that you've seen as a really important, critical role for the CMO to play in helping that organisation achieve the culture and build its muscle, apart from owning the customer, helping shape the strategies, or any other critical, roles or objectives that CMO needs to achieve?
I often see that if the CMO owns the customer, they often then own the the data and the insights that comes from that. And then data and insights around customer often starts to affect product or service as well. And so then driving that first level of insight around either product or service innovation. And so they often aren't the one that can deliver it all the way through the line, but at least they should be the impetus to change and then bring the inspiration of what that can be. And then that same piece that often what we see around customer data is customer data starts becoming a value opportunity in itself. So to own the data piece, you start to bring in the metrics, the analysis that goes with that, but then often that you can start to connect that analysis through the business as well. And then often from a customer point, and the customer data, that then has the spillover often into customer service. And so that's not normally their role, but they're often getting through their channels, either the complaints or the other elements that are affecting customer service. So then they should be the inspiration for what is good customer service.
So it's a really integral role, isn't it? It goes to many. Yeah,
absolutely.
Kind of an octopus through the organisation. It's under
That's
many
right.
parts of it, but it needs some supporting cast. Absolutely. So then maybe drilling down into the changes to human capability first, and we'll get to process and tech later. So what do you see as sometimes, so if an organisation is looking to build its capability around CX, what do you see as the new roles required to get that off the ground, and perhaps changes to existing roles?
Yeah. Once again, another big question. You like to load these ones.
Yeah. No easy questions on this podcast.
I think this is going to have to be quite generic because it's very dependent on what the organization does. Is it a service focused? Is it a technology focused? Does it produce actual physical products? And so that skews a lot of those roles accordingly. But if we imagine that we've got an international organization that's sophisticated around its marketing capability, that's then saying, we want to put the customer at the center, how do we do it? It's often a multi-year journey of transformation. And I think the best way that I like to, we've been involved in this a lot with organizations and trying to drive this. And it often starts with a rather large multi-departmental strategic project. So the CEO and the CMO say, we're going to make sure that we're more customer centric. These are the business reasons for it. This is part of our strategy. Then it's, what does this mean to the organization? And that should be how do we build out our multi-year journey? How do we define our customer vision? So what do we want to be when we grow up? And what do we want to be to our customer? Who is our customer? And then how are we going to make money out of that? That's what I think is that customer experience strategic vision. So to do that, it's multi-departmental, marketing, digital. If there's not digital, often digital and IT are sitting side by side, even though they're somewhat at odds with each other. But marketing, digital, operations, sales, and then I would also include finance and HR are supporting players in the cast. But the others, I think, need to all be wholeheartedly engaged. And that strategic project is often the launch pad for what becomes a kind of virtual hybrid team. So then you have the key sponsor needs to be CEO or leader. The project manager, project sponsor needs to be the CMO, or if you're creating this customer role, probably not yet. And then that team needs to drive this strategic project. Now, from my point of view, there needs to be consultants brought in that have done this many times. And so I think that's where learning from others, having a strategic framework, and the really important piece is, because this is where the turf wars come, like what project gets funded, and should we be focusing on customer service first? Should we be focusing on more marketing or whatever? That's where the wars start. And that's where having the third party arbiter in the middle that then says, here's the data which is driving our decisions, which is allowing you to align. Then that's where I think the consultants can drive that independent point of view. Drive that strategic project. First, align on vision. So this is what we want to be. Then gap, obviously, between who we are and what we want to be, and then turn that into the strategic project roadmap of activities that we're going to do, chunk them down. And then once they're chunked down, they then get handed out. And then you need to make sure that you've got a solid PMO structure across that, which can be internal. You then start to build the virtual team. The virtual team starts to mature. And then ideally someone steps up to be that chief customer officer, chief experience officer, whatever else.
Yeah. And do you often see, if they're starting from almost scratch, they might have the sophisticated marketing and digital team, but they may be lacking in CX if this is a new initiative. So do you see those kind of CX designers and research as, well, at least the research piece as the key roles, and the data and the designers as some of those initial roles that may get brought in to either set up the voice of customer or make sure they're collecting the right feedback and touch points and analysing that?
So what typically happens in that case is that most organizations don't have an ongoing voice of customer team or structure or strategy. That to drive that initial strategic project becomes a point in time. So there is then the qual and quant, who's our customer, what goes on. That's often done externally. And then ideally a measurement platform is then put in on a more regular basis. So whether or not it's MPS, whether or not it's a Qualtrics or whatever else it might be, that's then driving your ongoing measurement piece. We're the thick end of the wedge to start with, and then we start to pull away. And as we pull away, we start putting the roles in. And then we need the customer champion that understands the customer on an ongoing basis, the measurement tool and the analytics that go with it. You then need whether or not it's a service design or a UX design lead that's going to be driving those interventions that you're doing through the organization. And the big challenge there is to get the capability around that practice, but the understanding of the industry. So that's where you want to, ideally your team is some from out and some that are upgraded from in.
Yeah.
Wow. There's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI-generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
You mentioned it earlier. It's something we haven't really talked a lot about on this show yet. I'm going to put you on the spot, but the importance of the customer vision and getting that right. I think there's a recent book I was reading, I will need to remember it, but it was all around CX strategy. And they kind of gave the example. A lot of companies, they think when they first develop their CX strategy or vision, they think they want to be like Apple. Apple's always put up on this pedestal as this seamless experience across tech and products and in-store and from the server, the Genius Bar, et cetera, and that's a lot of the time the pinnacle that people put up, but that can be completely wrong. If you're an Audi or a different brand, you don't have a Genius Bar in the middle of Audi. So it's making sure your customer vision is, I guess, appropriate for where you want to go, the experience you want to deliver to your customers, but it's tangible and meaningful enough to set an aspirational direction, but be meaningful for the organization to follow. So any elaboration on that? What makes a good customer vision and how do you go about setting one, and what makes a bad one?
A bad one is not knowing actually who your customer is and focusing too much on segment, not enough on persona. So we see a lot of clients will then say, right, we know our customer. We say, okay, so who is your customer? Well, it's this group that comes in and spends most of the money. And like, okay, but then who's the next one once they're not there? What is the prioritization between that? And typically what we also find is that there's completely different views of who the customer is depending on which team you're speaking to. And so the importance of alignment around prioritization of customer. So if we only had $1, which is the customer we spend $1 on, it's a very complicated question to get right and requires a lot of alignment. It does require a lot of data around the value pools, which ones are growing, when you're talking multi-market, which markets are growing, which markets have got spend, what's the competitive set. So it's a complicated question to get right. By the end of it, you should have a ratified and agreed customer prioritization matrix, which then says this customer is more important than this customer is more important than this customer, because everyone wants all customers, but you can't have all. So prioritize your customers, understand within those customer segments, or if you've got down to a persona level, exactly what the pain points that you're solving for within your organization. And you're obviously not solving for them all yet because it's not a vision. So then within that, some prioritized opportunities around the areas that you can solve for. So turning that vision these customers, this future experience, and then the priority of what you're doing to deliver that. And it needs to sit underneath your broader business strategy, which is either growth or new market or new product or whatever. So they need to perfectly align. And typically what we see is that there is a clear business or an investment or a market-facing strategy. We're going to grow, we're going to do these markets, we're going to do whatever else. And then there is a separate marketing strategy. And then there is a separate operations goal. And so the customer strategy needs to sit across the top, which then underpins that business strategy. So importance that it's clarified, importance that it's iterated, and important that it is co-created by that broad leadership team with their thumbprint in it.
Yeah. So they've got ownership of it and
exactly
bought into it. Great. And then back to this team. So you've said the multi-department kind of strategy, the roadmap, it's multi-year. You've got the view at the top, this customer vision, and we mentioned marketing, digital, IT, ops, sales, finance. So how do you get them all working together in this interdepartmental team?
So to start with, clarity of vision. So that they're bought in, you ideally hope they're bought into the business strategy. Then from the business strategy into that customer strategy, the vision, what are we trying to achieve? And then the hard part is to personalize that vision for them. So I'm a UX designer and I'm passionate about customers, and you've told me that your vision is to grow and you're going to grow in this new product segment. But I know that the web experience is a bit shit and not doing what I want. So I'm passionate about solving that. So how do you turn it into, so it's OKRs or personal KPIs? How do we then have the what's in it for me? Why do I care? And what am I focusing on? How do I understand that the wall that I'm building is building the cathedral, not the wall that I'm building is just a small wall? So I think the connecting, and that's done, I mean, we do a lot of workshopping around this, bringing people together, personalizing the vision, committing to that personalized vision, and then turning it into actions. So that piece, and not washing over it, because no one wants to be told. So you share the vision, let them personalize the vision, and then you can then help manage them around their vision.
Yeah. And have you found like the employee engagement goes up once the business has this customer experience objective or lens or strategy underpinning the business strategy? I know, again, another big question, but I just find the example you just gave of the web developer and experiences shit, and they care about that, and that actually helps contribute to the CX strategy and the business strategy. That's meaningful to them when they're making a difference to a customer rather than tinkering, but doing some UX on a website. It's that whole analogy of the president asking the cleaners what they were doing, sending the man to the moon, and one said they were just cleaning the floor and the other said they're helping put a man on the moon. Yeah. But have you found that? Like, are there studies that show NPS or staff engagement increases in line with CX and those strong connections between EX and CX?
I think we have a methodology we call return on experience, and we try and draw a very clear line between leadership experience to employee experience to customer experience. So if the leaders have the right message and direction and strategic projects that are driving this customer vision, then they're giving that then to their employees that understand why they're doing and what they're doing and how they can then deliver, which then delivers the ultimate customer experience, which then obviously affects the bottom line and the growth of the organization. So there is a clear line between those. That's a massive undertaking in itself, but absolutely proven. The metrics are there as well. The piece that's kind of implied through all of that is the cultural piece. So yes, you might have the right vision, but if you don't use the right tools and have the right change strategy in place, or the right people, which is, I think, the change, if people are too business focused around their goals, like I want to achieve this target because if I'm going to get a bigger bonus and then it's going to personally benefit me, they'll be focusing on short-term goals. And CX is a leading indicator. You have to spend a lot of money to get your CX right, to then have future benefits of your organization, where you could spend less money on performance marketing and get your shorter term metrics right, because you're broadcasting maybe not as good experience, but you're broadcasting to more. but it's a short-term indicator which is going to affect you in the end. So I think the cultural piece about you also got to have sensitive, emotionally connected people that really care about the customer because they care about the customer, not care about the customer because they're going to make an extra bonus point. So that's where the cultural change needs to come.
Yeah. And I think that's where some of the clashes might come, right? If you bring in
Definitely
the service designers, the UX designers, or those that are really empathetic, and they come up against a business that's just at the start of the journey and are used to doing things in a more short-term sales focused manner. But then kind of related to that, but what are some skills or ways of working that might need to be unlearned by teams in marketing and throughout the organisation as they embark on that?
Back to the BX and T, I find that marketing teams can often be too short-term focused around those marketing metrics. So they're within their bubble. Often the business sees them as an expense, a necessary expense, but as an expense because they haven't connected their metrics to the growth metrics of the organisation. So I think that the unlearning the obsession around the customer metrics and relearning what's necessary from a business point of view. And I think in one of your previous podcasts, you were citing the Forrester study that focused on this. How do you change that pitch? You know, for me, it's always a business presentation first. So you're always talking to either the board or the management team because you're trying to get investment into what you want to do, but you're trying to understand, you know, the concept of a sustainable business is a business that has a long-term growth and revenue. So what you're trying to say is we should be obsessed about what the customer wants because we want more customers like that customer for our ongoing growth. So if you can make sure you quantify why you're doing what you're doing, and you might be able to quantify all of it, but you do need to quantify the majority.
Demonstrate the return on investment.
Exactly.
And link it strongly to the business.
And so marketing metrics are good. They're not the holy grail. We need to make sure we've got the other components in there.
And again, comes back to the importance of the OKRs and that lineage from the strategy of business. Yeah. So what are the changes to processes required then to deliver a more seamless and desirable?
An iterative approach to change in the organization. I think too often it's the budget cycle and then we do our big interventions kind of once a year or once every couple of years. And then we say, yeah, we'll leave it to them. They'll be fine. But in fact, it's the multi-departmental iterative evolution. So we've gone from being not good at customer experience to wanting to be great. We need this multi-departmental evolution to happen. And we need to connect those shorter term leading indicators to the longer term business benefits and to say, well, we did this and we are expecting this. And if we get it, then we've got to celebrate the interventions that worked and then make sure we do more of those. So it's a complicated piece to get right, but that very quick interventions that are going to create the change, we see the change, we then keep delivering that, we then do the retrospectives, but in a sophisticated way. And then we say, right, we're on the right path, we keep doing that, or we're not on the right path, and be honest about the things that aren't working.
Yeah. So I imagine at least within the cross-departmental or multi-departmental team that's been established, they're using Agile practices around. We've got our priority list, our backlog, shall we say, of projects need to be done, and then they're doing the kind of sprint planning the next week, month, quarter, and then they're doing sprint reviews and retros and working in that more agile way to iterate and learn and work out the next highest valuable piece of intervention to embark upon.
Yep.
And then
with that as well, the other important part is the metrics that the business believes in. So having a sophisticated tool or having a third-party point of view, because everybody thinks they're doing a good job and everybody wants to read their metrics that they're doing a great job, but not everybody is, or not everybody is answering what the business strategy needs. So you do need that more independent point of view, whether it's a third party or whether it's an independent tool that is giving you some form of measure that makes you understand whether you're doing a good job or not.
Yeah, that's kind of unified and across the organisation, imagine.
Correct.
And what are the first critical technology investments required to enable a CX strategy? Again, big question, depends on the industry, but what do you typically see as one or two of the foundations?
And then a very good and stable video conferencing tool. Allow your teams to be able to collaborate. We use also Mural or Miro
Yep.
So having a virtual collaboration tool to allow people to actually interact with each other and allow for a level of independence of thought, collective thought, alignment. So I think those are essential to allow your teams to collaborate either locally or at a distance. And then, as I was saying before, the measurement tools, the Qualtrics, the Medallia, those types of things, MPS, so that you've got something in place. Or if that's not relevant for your business, then having some element of customer panel, customer review, customer focus groups, and having that on a regular basis. So, and it's not always someone interpreting the data. It's actually the customer telling you. So you need to get the verbatims, you need to get the emotional connection to the customer. That's why the personas work so well, because we don't make products or services for data, we make products or services for people, and we need to understand who those people are.
And the customer panels, like what's an example you can share without giving away client names, but how big does this panel need to be and how do you get the most from them?
So we worked with one hotel group and they used their loyalty program and had a 3,000 person panel. They would then give loyalty points and use them on I think it was almost on a 2 weekly or monthly basis. Short piece of content, what's your feedback, thinking about doing this service intervention, what's your feedback? So that's one. There are others where we'll do within a target persona group, we'll do groups between 7 and 10, bring them in for a focus group discussion. So if we're doing a longer transformation, if we're doing a design thinking methodology, well, obviously in our empathize phase, we'll bring in the customer at that. Like to start with qual. So using those focus groups, individuals to start with, then smaller groups, then going to quant to really test that it's actually there, but then bringing them back in again in a focus group environment to test as you iterate through the piece. And then that group can often become, if you make sure you've got a mix between some detractors and some true lovers, that they actually do become your best fans because you've brought them along, you've answered their issues, and then they see it come to light, and then they become your true fans.
Yeah, love that. And we've talked about some of the changes to measurement, the importance to link it back to the business goals, the importance of the executive leadership. What else? What are one or two other either watch outs in terms of when things go off the rails, or are there critical elements for success to make the CX transformation work?
So I've seen organizations have a CX vision and then they've had a chief customer officer, but the chief customer officer is a bit toothless, doesn't really have budget, and then doesn't have the sponsorship or buy-in from the teams that it's trying to create these interventions for. And so get the right person that's great at the collaborating within the organization. So that's why often that customer officer can come internally to start with, to build up the team, because they know the individuals and they can get that political favor. So be honest about how serious the business is and how much of an intervention and change, or whether or not you're trying to do this test, and just be careful of the self-fulfilling prophecy of we're just giving it a go, then it's not going to work. So wholehearted is the business about it. Wholehearted is the CEO or leadership team around that. And then the other big pitfall that we see is that you get this big burst of energy up front, and you get this wonderful strategy and this great vision, and then you get this separate team that's going off and doing these interventions one team by one team, but the rest of the organization don't see it. And so no one believes in it because they can't see the interventions and they can't see the business benefit of it. So the communications in any change program, the communication, the clarification, the quick wins, the customer champions, that being very clearly communicated, and then get the feedback from the teams as well. So don't be too narrow. Bring your internal teams into those reviews and retrospectives around what's working and not working, so they feel like they're being heard as well. So
amazing advice, Guy. And we touched again on it earlier. Anything else, any other advantages of bringing in that outside help? You mentioned the arbitration, the third-party objective decision-making, the help with the data to inform the opportunities. Anything else, the role that outsiders can help in build capability?
I think the other one is the clarity around target operating model. It's the target operating model is always a very sensitive topic. Everyone has lots of points of view, but then if it gets kind of too co-designed, it can end up being a bit too similar to what's already there. So the external point of view on that, and doing that in a consultative way, so different teams have all their inputs, everybody understands the principles that are being used, and then they can see the future design options and then build that out. And then the other one is being honest about the capabilities to do some of those interventions. So if you're trying to do interventions that are too sophisticated for the team, then augment the team with the external capabilities as well that has done that before. And that's where sometimes we move on to a secondment model, where we then say, look, we can't get this person in market, or we can't get them for the next 6 months, but we can't wait. Okay, let's get the 1 or 2 people in that are going to augment the team and let them drive that change. So it's not a massive consulting project, it's much more of a team augmentation.
Yeah. Brilliant. Guy, before we get to the Fast Five, we've talked a lot about the CX strategy and how you go about implementing it and the importance of getting the right advisors on at the right time. It'd be great to wrap with perhaps a case study and your example of how you've applied the PwC approach and some of the results you've had in terms of implementing a CX strategy for a client or with a client.
So when we are looking at a specific kind of CX intervention for a client, as I said before, to make it successful, we'd like to link it through to growth. And so we have our core methodology we call growth through experience. And so it's built upon human-centered design and design thinking methodology. However, the most important first step, which I think is often missed, is to clarify the growth goal of the organization. So to say to them, yes, you want to create a better experience for your customers in X. What is your growth goal from trying to deliver that? So you get the growth goal clarified, which is that customer piece connected to the business strategy piece. So what's relevant for this intervention that we're looking at right now? And then you build yourself a growth hypothesis. So we want to update or improve this customer experience in X way. And our growth hypothesis is that if we do X and Y, we can then deliver that process. So perfect example is we work with an auto producer, very large brand, maybe European. They're all struggling with electric vehicles. Electric vehicles bring about a new customer, a new way of selling, a new way of servicing. And so this client was looking at a new sales process, much more digitized, a new product range, a new commission structure, new everything in there, and wanting us to help define their future customer. Well, first define who their customer is, then define the future state customer experience, and then drive that into the interventions that would then do. So this was working with the head of UX, and they luckily did have a whole bunch of registered customers that had already shown an interest in the car. So we went and collected a whole bunch of insight from them. We also went out to the typical EV or electric vehicle purchaser to see what their impression was of this brand as opposed to others. We of course did our best-in-class case studies, etc., to see what's working, what's not working. The important thing on the case study is don't just go for the hero that looks good, but for the one that's got good business performance. So the last thing you want is that one that looks great in the market, but really it's just a single case study. So, and then what we always do is have a broader kind of workshop style session where you bring it all in together and you get the whole, and this is back to the point about getting everybody aligned. You get operations, you get business, you get finance, you get them in the room, get them to go through the journey that you've gone. So what's the challenge? What's the hypothesis? What are the case studies? What are the potential implementations? We're kind of 90% cooked on the cake and say, this is what we think the cake could look like, but then we solidify and we agree. And then back to the point about make the vision theirs, what does that then mean to the different teams? So what are they going to do? Not what the consultant's going to do and what the customer team are going to do, but what are they going to do based on this? So they've heard that people don't understand how the battery technology works. So what does that look like in the showroom? They don't understand what the servicing schedule looks like. So what does that then mean to after sales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So make it real for them, but you don't own it. You're just giving them the framework and putting it on a roadmap and getting them to understand and then execute. So the big piece at the end of the process is to share the story. So we put a lot of effort into packaging up what we did, what was the evidence, what was the result, and then what are the actions, so that then the business can then share that to everybody. They can all buy into it if they haven't been on the journey, and then execute. And so the positive results of this are that the client has now launched their next 2 cars in the range that are electric vehicles. They are oversold by 300%. They had to get to a 25% sales target. They've already overachieved that of their range. And so they've really started to work it out. I mean, they've got the right product at the right price as well. It's not just the experience piece.
Yeah.
But the experience piece has definitely improved significantly. So it's a great project.
Yeah, great case study to bring it to light. And again, the importance of that growth goals reminds me of kind of the North Star or the metric. What are we all aiming for? What are we trying to achieve here? Underpinned by a deep understanding of the customer and what the pain points and the challenges they have and what information they're looking for, which then allows you to set up your CX strategy, your implementation, your tactics, you roll that out. And it just shows the leverage of the strategy done well up front. This now has seeds to harvest over the next rollout of all their cars because it's, it can be leveraged further beyond the initial project. So great project or case study to bring the whole discussion to light. So thank you for that, Guy. We are now ready for the Fast Five. Are you ready?
Yes.
So what do you believe are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high-performance marketing team?
The first one, I'm going to put empathy and curiosity in the same bucket. So caring about people and being curious about them and trying to understand not just the surface, but the thing that really drives them. Alongside with that, I would put passion. I put passion within my staff above everything. If they're passionate about what they're doing, they want to make it better and right. They'll be passionate about what they're doing for their clients, be passionate about the project. So I put that above almost all. And then this desire for discovery or creating the new. I think as a marketeer, as a customer champion, you can never say, this is my customer, this is my product. The customer changes, the product changes. So you've got to be the one that's always wanting to scratch that itch and go to that next bit. And look, sometimes what you're new isn't right. Yeah. But you have to be willing to constantly evolve.
Yeah. It's a good reminder because I think too often companies start out with that deep customer insight and discovery and they're always testing and then they get some success and products seem to work and they kind of forget to constantly test and close that feedback loop.
Exactly.
And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
I've got 3 here, but if I had to do, I would say connected. And to explain it a bit further, I put culture as one of the most highest importance of the team. Above performance comes from culture. Yeah. But you can have a high-performing team that has no culture that you have to constantly replace because they're delivering, but they're not happy. But you can also have a happy team that's not delivering. So get that right. Yeah. But I think to try and make sure the connectedness, so this is connecting with each other as individuals. And I think when you've got a high-performing team, people can too often be focused on the output and not the person. And so you have to put the rituals in place to allow them to connect on a human level. And that comes down to the breakfasts and the buying coffees and having the drinks. Now drinks is less important. It's much more about food or even virtual connectivity. But the connectedness of the team so that when the shit hits the fan, they've actually got each other's back and they're solving problems together. So
and ties into your first ones around that empathy and care.
Exactly.
And what is one metric you've successfully used to track and measure team performance?
So PwC loves a metric. Any agency, I would say, everybody's got utilization somewhere in their metric. Utilization is an important one to get right to make sure that your business is making money and driving the team. However, it goes at odds to a lot of the other metrics. The one that I think does work really well, which we've done and we've evolved slightly within PwC now, is we have a performance feedback or project feedback form. And so at the end of every project, everybody puts in their feedback and then they are scored by the project manager. And then the project partner then also has to validate that score if it's exceptionally high, and they're all collected up at the end of the year and everybody is scored. Now, I've tried to evolve that around an innovation score. So to try and make sure that success in the project isn't always just a happy client and a happy project team. It's also about how much did we push the business? How much did we push the product? And because sometimes you could be high innovation and low on happiness of, say, the client, because you went for the first or last. So you might have the perfect pitch, but not quite the perfect client for the pitch. So, but you still learn a lot. So I think trying to get, I think, that in-flight project feedback really, and that allows for an element of simplified 360, which then obviously gets kind of laddered up at the end of the year.
Yeah. And can see the importance of that innovation, because if all the projects are delivering similar outcomes, you're not pushing yourself or your clients forward to deliver something new and better next time.
And I want something new. I need to be engaged.
Yeah, don't we all? That's why we work in marketing and sales. And what is one skill or capability you've learned recently that you wish you'd developed much sooner in your career, and why?
So when I joined PwC, we have a practice called The Difference, and The Difference is our workshop methodology, which has come from the Matt and Gail Taylor methodology, which was been going since the late 70s, early 80s. And so I'd run many a workshop, but I hadn't really learned facilitation skills. And so through that methodology, which is a very rigorous, very deep methodology, I believe I've become a better facilitator. And I spend a lot of my time delivering kind of complex problem-solving sessions where you bring teams together to collectively solve and bring out the group genius. And that is probably the best part of my job. I think we drive the greatest impact for our clients by doing that. And it's a skill which I've evolved dramatically from what it used to be. And so, I love doing that. I have a team doing that with me. And
yeah. It's what I find most enjoyable as well about being a consultant is co-designing solutions with your clients and coming up with things that they never imagined and you might not have imagined.
Exactly.
And what book or books have you read that you found yourself recommending to others, or you think our audience would gain value from?
So it's a bit out of left field, this one. It was recommended by a team member of mine, and it's called Good Morning Monster. It's by a psychotherapist called Catherine Gildener, and it is basically 5 stories about 5 hero patients that she's had through her career. My mother lives with mental illness, and so there was a great kind of understanding of the practice of psychotherapy, which my mum's been in a lot, and I'm not so impressed with from her experiences, but to see it and understand it and then reflect on myself, very powerful book. And so there's some horrendous stories of these patients and what they've come through. And the reason they're heroes is that they've endured. So they've had these terrible lives that have caused them, these are all elements of paralysis and other issues that have stopped them being able to survive in society. And they've come through that and evolved. That journey and story was amazing, full of tears, full of laughter, full of knowledge.
Sounds powerful, and thanks for sharing that, and especially given it was recently, not by the time this goes live, but recently Mental Health Week or Day, was it?
There you go.
Yeah, it was only recently.
I think it's a week.
Yeah, Mental Health Week, so a timely recommendation. And where can people go to get in touch with you or learn more about the experienced consulting team in Hong Kong there at PwC?
So just go online, say PwC Experience Consulting. You'll see kind of market-facing point of view globally on that. My email, so I'm just simply guy.parsonage@hk.pwc.com, or my LinkedIn, and all of those I'm extremely active on. Very happy to have a chat. I'm to provide very quick updates, always happy to provide very quick feedback. And if something's really interesting, let's jump on a call. So,
Brilliant. And we'll make sure that email and everything's linked up in the show notes. So just look for that if you're wishing to reach out to Guy. Well, Guy, thank you again so much for your time and insights. It's so good to connect again. You've handled the big questions with grace and wisdom, shed new light on what it takes to drive a customer-centric culture, develop an org-wide CX capability. You drove home the importance of aligning the business and CX objectives. I liked the BXT framework that you shared. You reminded us CX is a team sport. It's not tennis. It requires multi-year, cross-departmental strategy with commitment from the CEO as a sponsor. But the CMO still has a huge role to play as that kind of project owner of that cross-departmental CX project. Also like some of the insights around the importance of a blended team. So growing some of your own talent, they've got the insights into the product and probably the customer already. They've got influence around the business. The importance also of bringing consulting firms to help set the strategy, build capability, and also bringing in perhaps new team members with new skills at the right time to help implement, sustain that strategy. So I think there's tons in this for the audience. So thank you once again for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Really well done. Thanks, mate.
You've been listening to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes. If you love the show, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can discover more tips and strategies to build a high-performance marketing team. And if you're feeling generous, please tell someone about the show who you think would benefit. We're on a mission to help CMOs build their dream team and enable marketers to do their best work. And we appreciate your help in spreading the word.